Hey everyone, it's Chrono from the Headphone Show. Today with me I have the Astro A40 TR headset and the MixAmp Pro TR. Let's check them out. Alright, so the A40 TR, tournament ready, and the MixAmp sound system is one of the more premium higher end offerings available in Astro's lineup of gaming audio products. Now, this headset and MixAmp combo retails for $249.99, but both the A40 and the MixAmp can be purchased separately at $149.99 and $129.99 respectively. So let's begin by actually talking about just the headset, starting off with accessories. Included with the Astro A40 is a 2-meter cable with an inline mute switch, which allows you to very easily disable the microphone on the headset. If you're using the A40 with the MixAmp, you'll see the volume knob LEDs turn red when muted, although unfortunately you won't really get a visual mute indicator if you're using the A40 by itself. Then, of course, the A40 includes the Astro A40 TR microphone, which sounds something like this. What you're listening to now is an unedited recording of the Astro A40 TR's mic, so it has no EQ and it's going straight into my PC's motherboard. As you can see in the background, it's being recorded directly into Premiere Pro, which is where I edit my videos. As you can hear, it's still a little bit nasally, but it has quite a bit more low end and clarity when compared to the Arctis 7's mic. So overall, I think it actually sounds pretty good, pretty clear, and a lot more natural. Of note, if you're using the MixAmp, you can actually select different levels of background noise compression for the microphone through Astro's Command Center app, and you can also set up mic side tones so that you're aware of how loud you're speaking. One more thing I wanted to note was that if you buy the standalone A40, you will also receive a 1.5 meter PC splitter cable so that you can connect both the headset and the microphone into your PC's motherboard. Moving on to the A40's build and comfort, it's outstanding. It's built primarily out of plastic, but it feels incredibly solid. The plastic has very little flex to it, and all the different moving parts operate smoothly with good tension and no creaking. The build on the A40 is also somewhat customizable, as the ear pads, speaker tags, headband, and microphone are all removable. On Astro's website, you can actually find replacements for all these parts, which allows you to customize your A40s with different colors, and you can even get synthetic leather ear pads, which enhance the headset's passive noise isolation. Then for comfort, the A40 is definitely one of the best gaming headsets I've worn. The inner area of the pads may be a little small, as I find that the top and rear side of my ears come in contact with the pads, but it didn't bother me at all since the velour used on these is remarkably soft and the foam inside the pad sits very gently on my head with little to no clamp. I think this would only really be a concern for those who are particularly sensitive to their ears touching the pads, but otherwise it's a very comfortable headset. Okay, so now let's talk about how the A40 sounds, and again, we'll first look at its performance without the MixAmp. I'm not actually unfamiliar with Astro headsets, as I've used A40s and A50s in the past. However, in the case of the A40, it never occurred to me to actually use it without the MixAmp, and now that I've tried it by itself, I was actually quite surprised by how good they sounded. The A40's tonality is pretty good, although it can be a little bit too warm sounding. In the bass region, it sees quite a bit of roll-off starting at around 80 Hz, so you don't get as much roundness in the lowest frequencies or that much sub-bass, although the bump that is there at around 100 to 150 Hz does help in keeping the bass feel present, and it also adds a touch of warmth without becoming bloated. Then, the mids are pretty linear from 300 to 2000 Hz, and they don't feel in any way overwhelmed by the mid bass bump below. The one thing I will mention though is that there did seem to be a pretty significant recession between 2 to 4K. Now, I'm usually pretty sensitive to that upper mid-range region, but even for me that did make the A40 sound a tad bit too dark and made some of the overtones in that section of the FR a bit lacking in presence. Lastly, the treble region is pretty smooth and warm, with the only noteworthy deviation being a slight emphasis at 6K that introduced some glare. So overall, the A40 has a pretty easygoing downward sloping balance, which makes them pretty enjoyable for music listening, especially if you prefer a warmer sound signature. That being said though, this is a stock tonality that, at least for competitive online games, I'd personally consider to be suboptimal, as the dip in the upper mid-range and the low overall treble level doesn't do much in the way of highlighting crucial sound cues like footsteps, reloads, and armor repairs. Moving on to Soundstage and Imaging, which I feel are more important to determining a headset's performance and game, the A40 has great spatial qualities. For a closed-back headphone, the A40 actually has a fairly spacious soundstage. It's definitely no DT770 Pro, but it actually creates a better sense of distance than some open-back headphones like the HD58X and the HD6XX. Additionally, the A40 has very good layering and depth, with all the different images, instrument lines, and sound cues feeling very distinct and adequately spaced, which in-game helps in easily assessing the distance from which various sound effects originate. Imaging is also very good on the A40. To me, it didn't feel quite as precise as that of the Arctis 7, but it was still very accurate, with no gaps that would make discerning the directionality and position of sound a difficult task. Also, because the A40 has a good sense of depth, I think most players will find it easier to identify the way in which the A40 projects sound cues when compared to the Arctis 7. The MixAmp allows the A40 to use Dolby surround sound, which of course affects the headset's soundstage and imaging. However, we'll get to that in just a second, as I think that first we should now talk about the MixAmp. The Astro MixAmp Pro TR is not really much of an amp, as it's really more of a DAC with DSP features. If you opt to purchase the MixAmp with the A40, a whole slew of features become available to the headset, the first of which is the ability to adjust voice chat versus game volume on the fly, as when the MixAmp is plugged into a PC, it creates two separate audio devices that can be configured for communication or game audio. On the rear side of the MixAmp, you'll find an aux 3.5mm line in that allows you to feed audio from any device with a 3.5mm line out to the A40s. Also located on the backside is an optical cable in for console audio, daisy chain ports for lagless voice comms with other MixAmps if used in a LAN party, as well as a stream 3.5mm line out that can send all the audio from the MixAmp to another headphone or interface, and the specific sound mix for all the stream out's audio sources can be adjusted through the Astro Command Center, similar to how you would balance audio on, for example, Streamlabs OBS. Then, the MixAmp also adds EQ presets to the A40, which can be cycled through by pressing the button at the bottom of the unit. By default, the presets are the Astro preset, which sounds really odd because it makes the A40 come through as compressed and nasally by scooping out the body from the mid-range and dramatically boosting the upper mids. Then, a natural bass preset, which just sounds like the A40 with no EQ, a balance preset, which unfortunately was a bit boxy since it reduced the lower mid-range frequencies while also boosting 1 and 2K, and finally a tournament preset that is presumably for FPS games, as it boosts the upper mid-range and mid-treble region significantly. Now, you can also make your own EQ profiles on Astro's Command Center software and save them onto the MixAmp, but the EQ section of Command Center is not particularly easy to use, and modifications made are not always reflected accurately. Then, finally, there is the MixAmp's Dolby surround sound processing, which is really strange. When the surround sound is enabled, the A40 soundstage becomes a bit larger. However, in my experience, I found that the surround sound was pretty disorienting. It added this weird, echoey, out-of-phase sort of quality to various cues when enabled. Additionally, it almost felt like the surround sound would make nearby noises really quiet or feel much more distant than they actually were. I think that for single-player or open-world games, the surround sound might be fun to experiment with, but sincerely, for online competitive games, I would advise against its usage, as at least for me, it really threw off my ability to gauge the distance and precise location from which sound was coming from. One last thing to mention before heading into the conclusion is that the MixAmp has two different SKUs, one for the Xbox, which has red accents, and one for the PS4 and PS5, which is the one reviewed here with blue accents. Do note that both are compatible with PC, you just have to set it to PC mode by flipping the switch in the back. Okay, so now to wrap up this review on the Astro A40 TR and the MixAmp Pro TR, I'll start off by saying that the headset itself is very good. Excluding Beyerdynamics offerings, the A40 TR has some of the best build quality and comfort in any headphone that I've tried or headset under $200, and it also has very good features that make it convenient for gaming whilst also delivering good sound quality. On the other hand, the MixAmp's lackluster offerings make it difficult to justify the $100 price increase over the standalone A40. The surround sound it offers is not really effective. Game and chat mix is a neat feature to have on the MixAmp as adjustments can be made faster, but nonetheless it's a feature that's already built into the Xbox and PlayStation systems, as holding down the home button lets you balance source volume, and the same can be done via Windows Volume Mixer on PC. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the EQ presets are not particularly great, and the EQ software in Astro's Command Center is not the most user-friendly anyways. In short, the MixAmp Pro TR feels like an overdeveloped box with several features that are somewhat redundant, and for me personally, it seemed to actually undermine the A40's sonic capabilities. Overall, if you're interested in an A40, I'd recommend just going for the standalone headset, as it's a fantastic option for gaming and entertainment at its $149 price tag. If you were looking into spending $250 to $300 in a wired gaming system anyways, I'd instead suggest looking into an option available in the audiophile market, as with that kind of budget, you could purchase a discrete amplifier, microphone, and a really good headphone. Thinking about it now, I think that in the future it'd be interesting to compare $300 of gaming audio gear versus $300 of discrete audio gear. But anyways, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful. If you did, do consider dropping a like. For more reviews like this one, I highly encourage you to check out the review section available on headphones.com, since it already has dozens of articles available. For more headphone and audio content, stay tuned by subscribing to the Headphone Show, and until next time, this is Chrono signing off.